Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation on the important topic of cultivating support for family caregivers and the sandwich generation. This event is part of the UCSF International Women's Day celebration. I'm Natalie Larson, Director of UCSF Family Services. Joining me today is Pauline Lee, Family Services Manager, and I'm delighted to introduce our presenter, Christina Irving. Christina Irving, a licensed clinical social worker, is the Client Services Director at Family Caregiving Alliance, the Caregiver Resource Center for the Bay Area. She oversees FCA staff who provide direct services to family caregivers, including assessment, counseling, education, and support. This talk is being recorded, and the recording, as well as the slide presentation, will be emailed to all registrants and available for future viewing on our website, as well as the International Women's Day website. The chat function has been disabled, but you may enter your questions in the Q&A, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation. Thank you to those who submitted questions during your registration process, and those have been submitted to Christina ahead of time. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Christina Irving.
Great. Thank you, Natalie, and thanks everyone for being here today. I hope this will be helpful. I've got a lot of resources that I'm going to share, and there are links to all of this. So when you get the slides, you'll have all the contact information and websites for everything I'm going to talk about. So hopefully that will be helpful for you as you're thinking about kind of next steps and resources. And definitely as we're going, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in. Hopefully we will have some good time at the end to talk about your specific questions or issues that you're facing. So we'll get started with that. So as Natalie mentioned, I am with Family Caregiver Alliance. We are a nonprofit based in San Francisco. It's been around for about 45 years to really support and improve the quality of life for family caregivers. So we work at the local level across the 6 counties of the Bay Area, as well as some work nationally, and are part of a statewide system of caregiver resource centers throughout California. So you all probably know this, you signed up for today's workshop, but just for context, when we're talking about family caregivers, we're talking about that family and friends. So we're going to kind of look at that big tent definition of family. So family and friends who are providing assistance to older adults with disabilities. It may include caring for children with special needs, but we're mostly going to focus on thinking about if you're caring for adults or older adults. But there's about 53 million people in the US who are caregiving. So there are a huge number of people, and that care was valued at $600 billion in 2021. So when you think about all the work that you're doing as a family caregiver, and sometimes it can feel like, oh my gosh, like, am I doing enough? Am I doing it right? It's recognizing that care that families provide is hugely valuable to our systems. Our long-term care and our health systems would not make it without family caregivers and everything you're doing. So that need for support is very much there. And we want to think about how do we improve our systems to support family caregivers and how to make sure that everyone has able to access them when needed. Dementia is one of the most common conditions that we see, and it is one of the bigger numbers of kind of caregiving families and scenarios. There's about 11 million people right now in the US who are caring for someone with dementia. And we expect to see that increase probably in the next 10 to 15 years as that the population with that diagnosis increases. And then I want to also touch briefly on what does it mean to be a sandwich generation caregiver? And I think there's more awareness of what that term is right now, but essentially those are folks who are caring for children still in the home, but also caring for usually parents. And so it's about 23% of people in the US are in this sandwich generation. It's most often people in their 40s, but you see, younger and older as well, just depending on, when people had kids and when maybe a parent actually starts to need care. So it can really vary depending on that situation. And then you see some variations on it. I've heard it called club sandwich sometimes, where it's like someone maybe caring for a spouse in addition to parents and then having their kids. So there's some variation on this. We don't have like perfect terminology for everything. But the other piece that has not been well supported and well talked about are when there are children in the home and when children also step into that caregiving role. And that is one of the stressors that a lot of family caregivers face, is that worry about, how much are my kids helping? And depending on your family, your culture, like what the expectations are around that really might vary. But about 7% of caregivers have reported that they have a child under the age of 18 who is helping with care. And that is likely an underestimate, just because of, how it gets reported and who's getting surveyed. But there is, again, a large population of kids who are providing this help, either because it's a grandparent or a parent who's needing care, or another family member or friend who they're involved with. So when we think about resources, we don't have a lot of great formal resources for kind of caregiving youth. There's not a lot of great services and programs, and yet we want to be able to think about what sort of support is needed there. And again, what that looks like is going to vary family by family. So when we think about the role of caregivers, um, caregivers provide a huge range of type of assistance, and it doesn't always look the same. And so sometimes people will say, "Oh no, I'm not a caregiver. I'm just helping with, doctor's appointments, or I'm just checking in occasionally." And it's like, well, actually, that's a little different than if you were just a adult child or a sibling, or maybe it's a niece or nephew, and you're helping with an uncle, or again, a neighbor. Caregiving covers this spectrum of type of assistance. So it might mean helping with finances and bills, helping with doctor's appointments, with medications, but it can also be providing that companionship or helping somebody with activities and helping them stay engaged. And we see that a lot when there's cognitive impairment, that sense of, I need to be there to make sure that they're doing things and not just, sitting in front of the TV all day. Like, what are the things that I can do to help them stay active and stay engaged? And then some of the more intensive care is often when somebody needs that personal care. So helping with taking a shower or getting dressed. So there's lots of different ways that people step into that caregiving role. Sometimes it happens gradually, where there might be some development of chronic health conditions or, again, cognitive impairment, and you'll see those needs increase over time. And so how much care you're providing is going to change over time. And then in other scenarios, it's sudden. Somebody has a stroke, they have a illness, they have a fall, and overnight you may step into that role of caregiving. So kind of wherever you are in that spectrum of care, it's recognizing that there are resources and supports that might help you. And if you are in the earlier stages, the planning that you can do ahead of time to maybe feel a little bit more ready for what some of those responsibilities might look like. And the reason why it's so important to have support is that we know caregiving can have a pretty significant impact on someone's health and well-being, which is not to say that there are not positive aspects of caregiving. There are, and that can be really helpful to identify and recognize. But we also know that caregiving can lead to higher rates of poor physical health. This is often because caregivers aren't making it a priority to get to their own doctor. I think sleep being interrupted is one of the biggest things that I hear, either because you're having to get up to help the other person, or just kind of worry and anxiety and trying to get too much done in the day. But it can have an impact on a caregiver's physical health. We see higher rates of depression and isolation. And isolation sometimes is a hard one for people to always grasp, because by definition, a lot of times with caregiving, there's at least another person around. Or, if you're still working, there's people in your life that you see all the time. But it's that sense of connection, companionship, of not feeling left out, that is where the isolation can come from with caregiving, because there isn't always a lot of free time. I think the more we talk about caregiving, the more we provide that support, the more we realize how many people in our life are caregiving. And knowing that there's, a coworker you see on a regular basis who's also in this role can be really supportive, because there's somebody else who gets it, who understands what you're going through. And then the impact of grief and loss and guilt, and I'll touch on kind of those emotions a bit later, but all of those can just have a significant, potentially negative impact on a caregiver's well-being. And so we want to look at, well, how do we support that? How do we help somebody not be as impacted? And the reason why we see some of these impacts on health is because of all the challenges. As a caregiver, you're caring for maybe your parent, your kids, you're working. You might also be trying to manage your own relationship with your spouse or partner, trying to stay in touch with friends or other people in your life. And caregiving is expensive, and a lot of the costs are not covered by insurance. That financial burden actually tends to be higher for sandwich generation caregivers and for people of color. We see higher out-of-pocket expenses within those populations. So needing to understand what are the financial resources available. And then we don't know exactly how things will progress with caregiving or when they will progress. We can't control often the other people in our life. We can't control the person who needs care or who we think needs care and they may not think needs care. So it can be hard to get them to accept help maybe. And a lot of times we don't even know when is help needed. When do I need to make a change? At what point should I implement additional services or supports? Like, when is the right time for that? And unfortunately, our system does not help with this. It tends not to be very well coordinated, and it is hard to navigate. So a lot of time is often spent on trying to figure out what's covered, what's not covered, who should I talk to for this issue, what am I eligible for? And that kind of feeds into this lack of help sometimes, either through our systems or, from family or friends who may not be stepping up to actually provide help and support. And then the question of whether or not we can afford care. So there's not one solution to all of these challenges that's going to just make it easier and better. It usually ends up being a lot of little things that combined hopefully can make a difference. But I do just want to acknowledge that it is not easy to implement changes, implement new services or programs. Again, these things are difficult. They're often time consuming. They may have long applications, or again, can you get the person who needs care to agree? But the more we can kind of identify what are the things that we can control, what are the options that we have, and if we can do it early, the easier it is to get that support in place. And in the long run, it may make a really big impact. So the sooner we can implement services and supports, it may not feel as burdensome to try and put those in place when you're at a point of just feeling overwhelmed and trying to do a million things. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of different resources and services, ways to get support today that hopefully will address some of these challenges that you might be facing as a caregiver. I will say, because I don't know exactly where everybody might be living, some of these are going to be higher level with then information about how do you get to those really specific resources that may be county by county. And then Family Caregiver Alliance information is in there as well, always an option to kind of reach out to us and we can give you all that very specific contact information. So let's jump into it. So the first place I want to start in dealing with this uncertainty of knowing what's to come or where things might progress is that information around the person's health, their diagnosis, and the type of care that they might need. This is surprisingly difficult to get sometimes. Sometimes you'll have doctors or healthcare staff who say, well, we don't know exactly how it's going to progress or exactly what it's going to look like person to person. So they may not want to set up expectations that it's going to look a certain way and may not give families sometimes the more concrete information. So it is important to really kind of advocate for that and say, I need a better understanding. I need a better diagnosis. Particularly when there's cognitive impairment. We still hear from families sometimes that they were told, oh, they're getting older. that just happens with age. And it's like, no, that's not accurate. So needing to be able to push back and say, actually, I'd like a more thorough evaluation. We need a better diagnosis. And then if you do get one and you still might not understand, well, how does dementia progress? How does Parkinson's progress? What type of recovery can I expect after someone's had a stroke? Those disease-specific organizations can be really useful and helpful contacts in understanding what some of that likelihood is in the future, what you might need down the road. So being able to connect with them is really helpful as a tool in getting that information that you need to help you plan for the future. Families also provide a lot of medical care, either just helping make sure someone take their medications, organizing medications, but also helping with medical interventions. Does somebody need to have their blood sugar tested because they're diabetic? Are you having to take their vital signs or track symptoms? And most family caregivers might be an exception in this audience, but most family caregivers did not go to medical school. They didn't go to school to be a nurse or a CNA, and they kind of are just thrown into it. And so leaning on those professionals to help provide that training. So, pharmacists are a great resource for understanding what medication somebody is on, thinking about what potential side effects there are. Or, I've had people who say, oh, well, I was given this medication and we have to take it, every 4 hours. And that means in the middle of the night. It's like, okay, is there another option? Is there a time release one? That might be a good conversation question to ask the pharmacist. Is there a different formulation that might still work? And then connecting with nurses around that training around medical tasks. And similarly for other types of personal care tasks or household tasks, thinking about occupational therapists and physical therapists who can be so useful in providing that training. How do you help somebody get from a bed to a wheelchair or into a shower safely? Or somebody who maybe because of a stroke or Parkinson's or some other condition that might be causing tremor or weakness has trouble eating. Are there utensils that have a wider grip, or a weighted plate or a plate with lips that's going to make it easier for somebody to eat and feed themselves? And so these types of professionals are really helpful in looking at those day-to-day tasks that might be difficult for you as the caregiver, but also for the person who is needing care to be able to be more independent. And visits from OT, PT, nurses can be covered by insurance if the doctor kind of essentially prescribes it, orders it, and says it's medically necessary. And in addition to that, there are also now billing codes for caregiver training. The person needing care doesn't even need to be there for it. Obviously, that's helpful in some of the scenarios that I just mentioned. But if there's training that you as a caregiver need that should be provided by a medical provider, there are billing codes that can be covered by insurance now, specifically with the intention of caregiver training. So those are things that would be done through the doctor of the person needing care. So those would be kind of great questions to ask them. You'll see there's a couple of links on here for videos that also give some kind of tips and tricks around this type of direct care. And again, you'll get the PowerPoint afterwards, so you'll have all of these as resources. There's some additional ones here you'll see around incontinence care, and again, personal care tasks, home safety, and medication management. So if there's some of those tasks that you're just like, oh, this is kind of a struggle, I'm not sure how to do, there are some of these videos that might be useful for you in feeling more prepared and feeling more confident in providing that care. The other piece that's really helpful to do kind of early on is that legal planning. So thinking about what do you have in place, what might you need to put in place either before caregiving ever starts, but it might be coming, or if it happens suddenly and you're like, all right, what do we have? So thinking about those legal documents that will allow you to step in or somebody else to step in and manage somebody's finances, manage their healthcare, And I think what's really important for caregivers is thinking about, do you have these for yourself as well? That worry sometimes with caregivers of what if something happens to me, you want to look at, do you have backups in place for the person needing care, but also do you have them in place for yourself? Like, who can step in and support you if needed? So thinking about this durable power of attorney for finance and advanced healthcare directive. Do you need a trust or have a trust? Conservatorships, which are always the last resort because they are a court process. But if none of this was ever done and you've reached a point where the person you're caring for no longer has capacity to sign a legal document and you do not have access to any of their finances to help pay for care, sometimes that conservatorship process becomes necessary. But the goal is always to reduce that likelihood. So if you're thinking about introducing this as kind of future planning, we know it's going to come up at some point. And I know there are some questions about, well, what happens if they don't think they need care? These are really good to do and to frame it as it's something we all should have, and it's not about your health right now, but to say, I want to make sure if there is a need for me to help you out in the future, if anything happens, even temporarily, let's make sure we have it in place so I can support you the way you would like to be supported. And I know how you would like to be cared for. I know how you want to have your finances managed. And we can do this planning now rather than, God forbid something should happen and I suddenly have to step in and I don't really know what your wishes are and how you would want them done. So that can be a way to try and start this conversation with people. If they're just like, no, I'm fine, I don't need anything right now. It's okay, can we at least try and get some of this legal documentation in place? Most counties have a senior legal program. They are not going to be able to do a trust for somebody, but when there's standard forms for documents, so things like advanced healthcare directives, power of attorney, they're able to kind of provide some of that guidance on those types of documents and some general education for people. And so they can be a good starting place as a useful resource. And then if you really do need like an elder law or estate planning attorney, there is a legal referral panel that is specifically for those types of legal cases. And so that can be a great resource. So thinking about that financial stressor and how do you pay for care? I will say this could be an hour in and of itself. So I'm going to do this fairly high level, but again, with resources of where do you go when you need a little bit more detail. Medicare, which is going to cover your doctor's visits, hospitalizations, your medications, generally is not going to pay for long-term care. It will cover, short-term stays in a nursing home for rehab purposes. It can cover home health services when it is deemed medically necessary to have that skilled, licensed professional providing those home health services. You do not have to be showing improvement to get home health. If it is medically necessary to have it for maintenance, that is allowed under Medicare. It is just harder to get, but worth kind of keeping in mind in thinking about kind of advocating for those home health services if it's needed. HICAP, which is a health insurance counseling and advocacy program, every county has one. They provide non-biased Medicare information. So if you're not sure what type of Medicare plan or have questions about coverage or you're getting denials for things, they are a good resource to understand Medicare benefits. Medi-Cal, as of now, who knows what might change, but Medi-Cal is available based on essentially kind of income limits. There is no longer an asset limit in California for Medi-Cal. So it does not matter what you have in savings for eligibility purposes. It may make a difference for Medi-Cal recovery, but it does not make a difference for eligibility. Under the Aged and Disabled program, there are income limits to not have a share of cost, which is essentially kind of like a monthly deductible that you would have to meet. So if you're under $17.32 a month then you would have no share of cost for Medi-Cal. There are some ways to help reduce your share of costs. Those are questions that you'd really want to talk with somebody a bit more specifically about. And then if there's a spouse or registered domestic partner, so if you have one person needing Medi-Cal and the spouse or partner does not, there are additional allowances under the spousal impoverishment law that allow that non-Medi-Cal spouse to keep additional income so that they don't become impoverished. So in those situations, again, you really want to talk with somebody more specifically about it. But Medi-Cal helps cover in-home support services, which is ongoing in-home care, long-term care in a skilled nursing facility. And then there's a whole new program under Medi-Cal called CalAIM that provides both enhanced care management and a number of community supports, including caregiver respite, potentially some additional home care, home modification help. There is a nursing home diversion program that helps cover some of the costs of assisted living. And there's a number of other ones, and they depend on what Medi-Cal managed care plan somebody is on. But there is this whole new array of services under CalAIM that might be helpful. Canner, it's a fantastic resource for Medi-Cal information. So again, when there's questions about specific eligibility for Medi-Cal, they're a wonderful resource. And then if the person you're caring for has long-term care insurance, which is rare, it's not super common, but you want to look at, is there an eligibility period where you have to pay out of pocket first before the policy will cover anything? And then what is covered? Home care, day programs, skilled nursing facilities that need to be a licensed care provider through an agency, so that really varies by policy. And then if you're caring for a veteran, a lot of times vets, when they left the military, they maybe had a career, so they paid into Social Security and Medicare, and so they say, oh, I didn't ever sign up for the VA because I had insurance, I didn't need it. It may be worth looking at again. There are certain benefits for veterans who have a service-connected disability, so disability related to their military service, but there are also both healthcare services and long-term care benefits that may be available to people who do not have a service-connected disability. There is also a VA caregiver support program that provides education and support to family caregivers. So if they have never accessed the VA before, or they have, but you don't know if you're fully utilizing and accessing the available benefits, the Veteran Service Office is a county program. So they are not under the administration of the VA and can act as advocates and help with eligibility and paperwork. So they can be a great resource in helping to navigate the VA, because I know that can be a complicated system. And then thinking about some of those resources in the community, and this varies so much by county. So you really want to look at, in the county where the person needing care lives, what's available. And so it's important to think about, like, what are the things that are most stressful for you? What are the things that you're worried about the most, that you feel like you need more help with? Do you live with the person? Do they live separate from you? Kind of thinking about that and where the gaps are, to look at what might be available in the community to help meet some of those needs and hopefully decrease a little bit of that stress. So case management can be a great resource. This is, I think, especially helpful for long distance caregivers. Like, you're not there all the time. Or again, you're working, you have kids, you've got other responsibilities. It's hard to be the one to navigate and manage everything. Case management programs can help really do the legwork, do more of the follow-up, do that oversight and monitoring. There are private geriatric care managers that you can hire. There may be care management available if somebody has Medi-Cal. Care navigation is a more common term that we're seeing in healthcare settings now, and also in some community programs, where it's not going to provide as much as a case manager does, but it's going to do a little bit more coordination. And so that really depends on the county. There may be some counties that are also funding case management for older adults. And so that's kind of worth looking into, because then that might be available for free or for low cost. Thinking about meal delivery programs, paratransit services, if somebody needs like wheelchair accessible transportation or other transportation that can just help people get to and from doctor's appointments, to grocery shopping, to a senior center to participate in activities. And then again, looking at home modification, and those will vary by county. And then really looking at within the medical system as well of what sorts of resources are available. Hospice, which is obviously more time limited, more end of life focused, but palliative care, which for anybody who has a serious illness is a potential resource where you have medical providers who are looking a little bit more holistically at symptoms, at quality of life. And it doesn't always take the place of someone's primary care team or their treating physicians, but it can be a great additional resource to come in. And again, we talked about home health and PT and OT. So if some of these resources are ones that you're just like, yeah, that would be really helpful, I feel like we need that, then it's that question of, well, how do you find them? And again, it varies sometimes dramatically county by county. So you can always reach out to Family Caregiver Alliance. We're happy to give you those specific referrals depending on your county. In the Bay Area or across California, there are the Caregiver Resource Centers. There are also the area agencies on aging. So those are the bodies that are either for a single county or sometimes they might cover multiple counties. That is usually who is funding these programs. So they are the ones who are funding paratransit and other transportation services. They're funding Meals on Wheels. They're funding case management programs sometimes. So that's always a place to start is your area agency on aging and say, these are the things that I'm finding most difficult. And is there a resource that is going to help me? You don't have to know if it exists, but if you can say, this is the part that I'm finding difficult, that I am finding challenging, it is their job to help you identify then those specific resources. FCA also has a services by state navigator that connects people to services throughout the country, or you can always call and we have somebody who can provide that guidance and those resources. And then being aware about some of the crisis services that I think is really important to know. Again, especially that question of if somebody is not maybe open to a lot of help. Adult protective services. These are social workers who will investigate and provide support when there are cases of abuse or neglect. And so this could be financial abuse. Maybe somebody was a victim of a scam or they're being financially manipulated. It could be physical abuse. It could be emotional abuse. It can also be self-neglect when somebody is not able to manage their care needs. The one piece that I think is just really important to understand about adult protective services is they do not have the same legal weight as CPS does. They cannot come in and force somebody to move, to accept more care. If somebody has capacity to make their own decisions, they can't necessarily do a whole lot. Sometimes, though, having this like external third-party person come in who can talk about services, sometimes that is helpful in a way that family is not going to be, because you're my child. Like, what do you know? Like, you don't know what I need. You don't know what's out there. And so they sometimes are able to implement change in a way that others are not able to, but just to know that that is a resource. But they cannot force those things on their own. They may have to, should somebody no longer have capacity, try and begin the process for something like conservatorship. But then they're using that court system to be able to make change in those scenarios. Disaster distress helpline, just given everything that keeps happening between fires and other natural disasters or pandemics. It is a emotional support crisis hotline that can help connect people to other services, mental health services, and other disaster relief services. Alzheimer's Association is a 24-hour helpline related to dementia. So 24/7, there's someone you can talk to with anything dementia, caregiving related questions. Friendship Line is operated by the Institute on Aging in San Francisco, but is available statewide. It is a crisis and warn line for older adults. And obviously the 988 crisis hotline either for you or the person you're caring for, kind of in an emotional or mental health crisis. So other support that caregivers need, thinking about respite, and respite just means getting a break. And that could be by utilizing family or friends, having them help out a little bit more. It could be hiring in-home care through a home care agency or hiring somebody privately. So somebody you find through a attendant registry or even word of mouth sometimes, to come in and help provide care. This is generally out of pocket, so it's a cost and it is not cheap. So it is not always as easily accessible, but potentially a benefit that would be helpful, again, especially at a distance. This may be necessary. Where it can be covered is so somebody who is on Medi-Cal or Medicaid in other states. There are programs of consumer-directed care. So it's IHSS in California that help pay for in-home care on an ongoing basis, or again, programs through the VA that could be available for folks who are needing care. Other options for respite can be in short-term in care facilities. This has been harder since COVID to find assisted living or boarding care homes that will take people for shorter stays. I haven't seen anything less than 2 weeks for the most part. Like, they're requiring just a longer minimum stay, but it can be a really helpful resource if you need to travel or go out of town and you may not want somebody to be in your home for a long period of time. Or your health has changed and maybe you're needing surgery and you've got somebody who needs a lot more care. And especially if you're limited and if you've got like kids at home, you're like, I don't know that I want somebody coming over all the time, because that might be disruptive to the rest of the family. That could be a resource to bring in, rather than bringing in care, is to use out of home care. Adult day programs. These are a fantastic resource. It is one for the person needing care that they go to during the day. Most of the time, like 2 or 3 days a week, could be up to 5. But where it's helpful is it gives you, the caregiver, a break. It gives the rest of your family a break. Somebody leaves the home as opposed to a person coming in. But it also gives the person needing care more socialization, more activity, more engagement. And that can be really useful for them and for you. Where they are and how many are available, again, very county by county basis. I will say, sorry for anybody who's in Alameda County right now. That county has lost almost all of their day programs. Although we're hopeful that there's some work going to hopefully help start a new one. But depending on where people live, they may or may not be super close by. And then short-term respite grants. So if you don't qualify, especially for Medi-Cal, and you're looking at, I need more care and we're having trouble affording it, and I just need to be able to get some breaks. FCA and caregiver resource centers have grants. There may be other grants available through your local area agency on aging. So again, things that vary county by county. Alzheimer's Association has respite grants. Doesn't have to be an Alzheimer's diagnosis, just dementia. And then GUIDE, which is a Medicare, traditional Medicare, not managed care plan, traditional Medicare dementia care navigation model. Through UCSF, they have the dementia care ecosystem. That's a GUIDE model. FCA has one. There's a number of other groups that are doing it. There is respite available through that. And then again, through Medi-Cal and the CalAIM program. But we really want to think about, how do you also engage family and friends? How do you look at those responsibilities that may be kind of weighing you down a little bit? And how do you help spread them out across other people? And it's really important to know what you need help with and to start with that. And as weird as it is to sometimes say, like, have a list of things that people could do for you. That's actually helpful, because there may be somebody who says, gosh, I'm not really comfortable coming in and providing like respite care. I don't know how to manage dementia, or I don't know how to help somebody get around, or I'm not really sure what to do if an emergency happened. And maybe they're not as comfortable providing that care, but they will bring you meals. They will help make phone calls to these programs to determine eligibility and collect that research for you. They will, help pick up your kids from soccer practice, or when they're going by the grocery store, will call to see if there's anything that you need. And so there may be other tasks that somebody can do that just takes a couple of those things off of your list. And that may be helpful for them to be able to support. And to ask for things that are helpful for you, for your family, and for the person needing care. So to really think about what are all the things that could be done that would be useful. If you're trying to do this with like your family, your siblings or extended family, and be like, all right, we need to get more help here. We need to all get on the same page. Thinking about family meetings and potentially using like a neutral third-party person to help facilitate. This might be a case manager, could be a faith leader, a therapist, but having somebody who can help navigate that conversation for you. And then there are a lot of care coordination tools out there, like a lot. Lots of Helping Hands and Caring Bridge are two of the ones that have been around the longest. It lets you create a page around the person needing care, so you can give updates to whoever you've invited to be a part of that page. There are shared calendars if you want to encourage people either to come by and visit or to help with certain tasks. And then there's ones that are like app-based, like Cozy, where, if you have multiple people involved, either family members, maybe a home care person, and again, at a distance, this might be useful. It lets you track who gave the person the medication that day, so you all get to see it. Shared grocery lists. So it may be something that your kids are on as well. They see something that you need to get from the grocery store, they get to add it. So it's ways to kind of help coordinate care, and just coordinate kind of those daily needs. And then really thinking about, outside of the hands-on care that somebody might provide, is who are those allies just around communication and care planning with your loved one. So that could be the doctor. Doctor doesn't live with them, or doctor's not family who's involved and bringing this stuff up all the time. So sometimes the doctor is that authority figure that they will listen to. And again, let the doctor be the bad guy, that they're the ones who are saying, actually, you need to bring in some in-home care that is medically necessary for you. Let the doctor be the one to try and initiate that and push that forward. It might be a faith leader who that's somebody that they're going to listen to, or it might just be there's another family member or a friend that you kind of, as that point person, isn't going to get as far as somebody else will, because there just might be more baggage there around encouraging care. So think about, who else will they listen to? Who else do they trust? And how do you bring that person in? And so if you're looking at kind of having these conversations as a family, making sure everyone has the same information. Do you have, a report from the doctor or from a physical therapist? Maybe you need a report from a care manager that really looks at what their care needs are and the diagnosis, so that everyone gets the same information and everyone has the same understanding of that information. Talking about legal and financial planning. And then thinking about, again, are they competent to make decisions? And if that answer is yes, and even with dementia, does not mean somebody loses all capacity to make all of their decisions with the onset of dementia. So if they still have that legal capacity to make decisions, then they can, even if we feel like the decisions are wrong or not in their best interest. And that's a really hard place to be in, to know that things could be better and you're not in a position to make them happen yet. And that's where having these types of conversations is often an ongoing process, something that we have to do over time, because we may not always get there at once. It may take a little bit of time. And so think about how we talk to people, other family members, again, the person needing care. And some of this may be common sense, but I'm gonna say it anyway, because when it's family, we are not always as good about how we communicate in these situations. We have a lot of history and sometimes baggage within our families. But really important to start off a place of being respectful and allowing those differences of opinion. How do we make sure that we are able to be calm as much as possible, and to really focus on the present situation? And I think this is most commonly a concern when it's siblings, that we do not want to bring up what happened when we were kids. that is not going to be a helpful start to a conversation about mom or dad's care. So unless you want to go into family therapy, if you're focusing on kind of caregiving and a family meeting, then you want to think about, okay, what's happening right now, not what happened when we were kids and who was the favorite. Really speaking for yourself, not assuming how other family members are going to respond, and really being aware of nonverbal communication. So how we say it, our tone of voice, our body language, and be really conscious of how this shows up in written communication. We tend to text a lot of times more than we talk with people these days. And, someone might offer a suggestion and your response could be, that's fine. And it could be, yeah, that's fine. They might also read it as a more passive aggressive, that's fine. So that's where we need to sometimes bridge that written communication with the conversation, or give yourself time to write out a longer response than maybe you always feel is necessary, but just to make sure that there's not some unintentional tone in the written communication. And then be willing to negotiate. We're not always going to get our way or get it how we think is best at any one time. And so how are we willing to kind of approach these conversations that reflect a willingness to negotiate? To be able to say it seems like you really want to be independent and not have any outside help. I would probably feel the same way too. I wouldn't want to have anyone coming into my home. But I worry about, something could happen. And so I wonder if we can talk about some steps that we could take to make sure that you're as safe and as independent as you can be. It's not a guarantee that, again, we're going to get what we want, but the goal is to really keep those avenues of communication open so that we have better odds of getting somewhere in the future and helping us to maintain that relationship. A lot of times what makes it challenging to navigate all of this is just all the emotions that come with caregiving. Guilt is probably one of those hallmark caregiving emotions. That feeling of I need to be able to do it all. It's all the shoulds. I shouldn't get impatient. I should be able to visit more often. I should be able to spend more time with my kids. I should be able to get everything done at work. I need to be there. Otherwise, I won't forgive myself if something happens. And so recognizing that we cannot be perfect 24/7. It's just not possible. And so we want to consider sometimes reframing this idea of guilt into regret. We may not have done anything wrong, but we are faced with really difficult situations and we have to make really difficult decisions. So being able to say, I'm doing the best I can with the amount of time I have. I regret that I don't have an extra 10 hours every day, or that we have to bring in care, or that there are times I'm going to have to miss something with my kids or my family because I have to do this other thing, or that there are times that I'm not going to be able to visit my parent as much because I need to be there for the rest of my family, and that is the reality, and we are doing the best we can with the reality. Anger is a normal emotion. We want to be conscious of if we're acting on it, but recognizing that we are allowed to feel angry and thinking about what are those constructive ways that we need to develop to deal with it. Being able to vent and talk to people, learning when I need to walk away and give myself a timeout, but having those resources. And similar with resentment, sometimes it's towards the person needing care that maybe they didn't do the things that you wish they had done earlier that might have made this easier, or resentment that other family members are not stepping up more. And so it's thinking about, again, who do we talk to? What are the things that we have to find a way to learn to let go of, or what are those boundaries that we need to set for ourselves? And then that ambivalence that we, normalize holding conflicting emotions, that I both care about this person and I want to be there for them, and I wish I didn't have to do this. And that both of those are okay. And this idea of ambiguous loss, the idea that somebody is there, but not there. They're sitting right next to me, but they are not the same person that they used to be. And the loss and grief I feel, even when they are still here. The anticipatory grief, because I know things are going to change. I know things are going to come up in the future. I know this is going to get harder, or they're going to lose more functioning. And so we start grieving for that early. And then we've kind of talked about depression and isolation, and those just being more common for caregivers. So it really speaks to this need for support. And I think there's so many different ways that caregivers can get support. And it's about figuring out what works for you. What do you find most helpful? It could be individual counseling, check through UCSF, through your employee assistance programs. Is there something available there? Through your health insurance, although I know that's difficult at times to get coverage through health insurance. There is also this Insights Counseling Program, which is a program of SCAN health plan. It is not limited by insurance, though. Nobody has to be a part of their health insurance. It is available statewide, virtual counseling, 10 to 15 sessions for any older adult 55 and over or caregivers. So it is a way to get some individual counseling. And then caregiver support groups, I think, are super useful as a way to hear from other caregivers, to be in that space with people who get it. So there's caregiver support groups that are not specific to diagnosis. FCA has some just very general ones, a young caregiver support group, an LGBTQ group, and an African-American group. Daughterhood has a number, and it's not just for daughters. That's just kind of who founded it, but it's an open kind of caregiver support group. They have some caregiver support groups that are more specific, like dementia, grief groups, post-caregiving groups, some for like sibling dynamics. Healing Circles also has caregiver support groups, grief groups. And then UCSF has some caregiver support groups now as well. Looking at those disease-specific organizations, so Alzheimer's Association, Stroke Association, Parkinson's Association, they all have caregiver support groups. And then around grief, caregiving is a long journey, so connecting with those resources as well. And so recognizing that it is important to kind of get that self-care and to really build out your community and to find those things that are helpful for you, whatever they might be, whatever those activities are that you find soothing and healing. And I'm not going to read through this, but I just want to make sure when you get the slides, if you actually click on this document, it will open up to a printable version of the document as well. But recognizing, again, that importance of self-care, of maintaining facets of your own life, of receiving consideration, affection, and forgiveness for what you do, but that importance of support for you as the caregiver. And then again, FCA as a resource to feel free to reach out to us for information about programs, lots of education programs and other services. And so with that, I know there's a number of questions that have come in. I've seen the numbers, but I haven't looked at them all. So let me pull those up, or Natalie, I know it looks like a couple that you all had answered. So I see that the first one around kind of the non-compliance, non-amendable people in home. This is where bring in your network. There's different ways to do this. Sometimes, especially if it's dementia, there's a way to say, oh, this is covered by insurance. The doctor ordered it. You get the doctor to write it down on their letterhead. That can be really helpful because it's not coming from you. It's a requirement. Doctor ordered it. They're just coming out. It could be help for you, so it's like, oh, my friend's going to come by and help out, or I'm having a house cleaner come and help. So it really depends on the situation a little bit. I'd say feel free to reach out to us, reach out to the Alzheimer's Association helpline, but bring in your team and who can help you kind of problem solve different ideas around that. It is hard, but it can be overcome. The links, yes, this will get sent out to you. You'll have all the links that were in here. is there a resource to find home health aid specific to culture, religion, national origin? Not one specific resource, but it absolutely is something that you can do in trying to screen. So if you are reaching out to a home care agency or you're using an attendant registry, something like care.com or CareLinks, you can post a job description and say, you know, I'm really looking for somebody who, it could be enjoys these hobbies, can cook this type of food, or here's who, you know, my father tends to respond well to. And, you know, you want to find that match, and that match can be around personality, around hobbies, but also thinking about, yeah, kind of food and culture. And this is who somebody really responds to. And that's where word of mouth can be really helpful as well. So you might look at, are there any particular cultural groups that already exist, and kind of put the word out there to say, hey, I'm looking for somebody, because chances are somebody else will know a person that they've hired as well. And that they can be a great resource. So that could be another way to find care.
Hi, Christina. I'm just
Yeah,
going to read out the question that
thank
you
you.
just answered, and if you can
Thanks.
read the other ones, or I'm happy to as well. But the audience, I mean,
Okay.
can't see this. So
Got it.
the question was, I have struggles in finding home health aides. My elderly father is unwilling to go to assisted living since he likes only the food of his background culture, which is not found in assisted living. Is there a resource to find home health aides specific to cultures, religion, and national origin? So you did answer that one.
Okay. All right.
I'll let you move on. No, that's okay.
Okay. Thanks. And so somebody else asked, so FMLA, so family medical leave and paid family leaves, great for having employer supported protected time off. Absolutely. That's a fantastic resource. I know that works a little differently within UCSF, so I will leave that to the folks here to address about how that's available through UCSF employees, but that absolutely can be a resource. And there's another question about what type of support does UCSF provide to employees if the manager is not being supportive? So I can't answer that question. I'll leave that to Natalie or Pauline. I will say there is also a statewide legal aid at work program that can help provide more. And so if you need to talk to someone externally, can provide that guidance on the legal requirements as well. I know that doesn't always help with those kind of internal worries and concerns around it. But that is available. And Natalie, I see you went.
Yeah, we can certainly help. If you want to email us directly, feel free to email us.
Okay, great. And I want to make sure a couple of the questions were about slides. So I'm trying to skip past those. I'm a former caregiver applying to medical school. Congratulations. And have research interest in caregiving. What would you want to see in caregiver health and patient outcomes? Oh my gosh. Okay. I'd say feel free to send me an email separately. That may be a little bit more than we can get into today. And I'll make sure my contact information is up. There's a lot of research that's been done around caregiving. Again, we kind of understand what the impact is. I think we really need to look at what are the services that are most impactful, what makes the biggest difference, because I think that helps us think about funding as well. And I know we're at time, and I think I have caught all the questions. Although Natalie or Pauline, tell me if I missed anything. But thank you all for being here. I hope this was helpful, and definitely the slides will get sent out to you, so you'll have all the links to resources that I talked about.
Thank you so much, Christina, for all the valuable information you provided today for us. I definitely learned a lot. I also want to thank Dorothy Wang from UCSF ETS, who provided invaluable support behind the scenes. And a huge thank you to all of you that joined us today, and have a great afternoon.